So thank you everybody for coming. Thank you Dr. Solez for inviting me back to the course. As some of you know, I've been here a couple of times before. The topic that I'm going to talk about today is technology and global citizenship. And I've tried to include some new thoughts and some new initiatives that at least I've been involved in, and also some ideas that have come up, particularly from recent events on this idea of global citizenship. So what I hope to cover today is this concept of global citizenship, what that means, the role of technology, particularly in globalization, but also in how technology comes with certain rights and responsibilities as it relates to global citizenship. I'd like to talk a little bit about Innovative Canadians for Change, or IC Change, which is the group I founded, which has developed a few initiatives along the lines of, or along the mission statement of global citizenship, and particularly how technology can foster that kind of, I guess, engagement. I'll talk about the Kenya Ceramic Project and its offshoot, the Filter Diversification Project. Some of our other technological innovations is the Thai Burma Stove Project, and some more complex ideas that have grown from a thought process that, while initially evolved from introducing an idea like a technology, but then how do we build a system to ensure that that technology is taken up and then starts to impact the greater good, I guess. And those two projects are the Kibera Medical Record Initiative, as well as the Kenya Surgery Program. Maybe I'll talk a little bit about myself and my background. I'm in my general surgery residency right now here at the U of A. I was born in Iraq, and we lived in Europe, in France, and particularly in Paris for a significant portion of my life. Then we returned to Iraq in '93 during the embargo under Saddam Hussein, and then the situation got a bit dicey and hairy, and we moved to Malaysia and lived in Kuala Lumpur for a few years. Then in 2000 we immigrated to Canada, came to Calgary, did my undergraduate degree there, and then started medical school at the U of A in 2006. So this concept of global citizenship it's not a new concept, I guess, but the term might be new. It's probably been coined approximately 7 or 8 years ago. Socrates, about 2400 BC, said that he's not an Athenian or a Greek, but a citizen of the world. And that was a pretty radical concept at the time in defining identity, and that it went beyond the nationalism or the immediate geographic or ethnic, I guess, background that an individual might have. And Socrates argued for a more holistic point of view, that we are humans and citizens of this world. Now, particularly, well, more so now, the world seems to be shrinking, and there is increasing access, particularly for people who might have come from the developing world or the global south, have increasing access with new technologies, particularly when it comes to the internet, telecommunications, and access to just information in general. So, but at the same time, while the world is shrinking, cultures seem to also are becoming more homogenized. There's less discrepancies between different cultures, and I'm not sure if that's exactly a good thing or a bad thing. The term global citizenship, as the term citizenship implies, is a bit of a disputed term, and not everybody agrees that that's a good term or one that we should use, and some individuals, especially academics, are working towards maybe a better definition of what that means. And I think the point of contention really is not the global, but it's the citizenship word. And the reason that is because citizenship is a legal term. It implies that you are a member of a nation state, that you have a nationality. And so a lot of the lawyers that I've talked to said that citizenship cannot be global in that sense, but that really we may want to look at another way of describing that. But some academics argue that citizenship goes beyond just the nationality and the passport or the legal rights, but also encompasses a more global ethic. That if you are a citizen of this world, there is a certain element of rights and responsibilities that are inherent to somebody who is starting to play on the global scale. That somebody who now is speaking in this room is being podcasted or videocasted, and this message might go on a global platform like the internet, and individuals all over the world might see this message, and that this is no longer a message just for this audience, but more of a global message. And so I feel like what we say now potentially might have repercussions, and also I have a certain right to broadcast this message, but at the same time it comes with certain responsibilities. And just looking at the United States and their recent elections, I just found it interesting that on Facebook, and a lot of people were commenting here in Canada, that they were urging their US comrades and their friends to go out to the polls and vote, because it is such a great right, and that it shouldn't be wasted. And due to low turnouts in the past, people felt that this was an impetus, especially for the youth, to come out in big numbers and vote for to make a change. And what they saw was a defining moment in US politics, particularly between a Republican candidate with certain views, particularly as it comes to foreign policy and economics, versus an individual who may not have fit exactly the hopes that he may have promised, but at the same time still had a platform that was more attractive for a lot of people. What I found interesting, though, was that some people on Facebook were saying, if I was a US citizen, or I wish I was a US citizen, or I could have the right to vote in the US elections. And these were not Americans, these were Canadians, some of them here in Edmonton, who wanted to vote in the American elections, which I thought was an interesting concept. And looking at also how after hurricane came and hit particularly areas in New York and New Jersey, the governor of New Jersey also issued a law that you can vote by email, and that it applied in the same sense as the way you would if you were overseas, but you still wanted to exercise your democratic right of voting, even if you're not geographically in the same place. And so I started to think of this concept of e-democracy, and as the world is becoming more and more interconnected, will there be a time when individuals who see a vested interest in where an election is happening could potentially vote in those elections? I know Kenyans will probably have voted for Barack Obama if they had a chance, if they had a way of sending in their email votes. But it's a little bit of an interesting concept, at least in my mind, of what the world is going to be like, especially as it's shrinking and events that are happening in the US are affecting Canadians. Should we then, since we're being affected, have a responsibility to also participate in those elections? Now, global citizenship, for the most part, in a lot of the academic papers and in media, is seen as this positive thing. But could there be harms to it? And I know some academics that have been talking particularly about corporations and how they're the new kind of imperialists, and that they are moving to various different areas around the world. Now, instead of the British Empire, now there are large multinational corporations that are starting to play a bigger and bigger role in different countries. And so this notion that the world is shrinking, that we should open the doors and really let more and more interactions happen, is benefiting corporations and is allowing people from corporations to enter new markets, potentially at the detriment of those individuals in those countries, because they don't have the same competitive advantage to face such a large multinational corporation. And it maybe goes back to this homogenized, but also a harmful outcome of this idea of global citizenship. Now, I believe that technology is probably one of the main driving forces of globalization. We talked about the internet, talked about increased access to information technologies, and I think that increasingly that's going to be more the norm, that we no longer are limited by our geography, we're limited by our access. And that access to technology becomes a critical point in, I believe, human rights, and that as global citizens, we maybe should advocate that people globally should have a right of access to technologies, particularly the information technology or access to the internet. Now, I know that a lot of work's being done right now in the ethics of people who, particularly in developing countries, don't have access to the internet, and what kind of position does that leave them in against somebody who does have access to the internet and all the opportunities that that might bring. So could access to information technologies such as the internet be heralded as a human right? Could that be taken up to the highest levels of justice and said that just like the Declaration of Human Rights and other charters like the United Nations Charter, could access to IT and the internet be included? And I think in the near future, we'll see probably more of that coming into play. Technology, though, not always beneficial, and I think that there are definitely harms, and that topic is a whole probably years worth of coursework and discussions, which we're not going to go too much into, but I think that the important way of maybe looking at the role of technology, I'll focus more on the transfer of technology. So there are two models for how technologies that are developed in a place is brought to another set of people. There's the vertical and the horizontal transfer. The vertical is a more, one might say, paternalistic approach to giving technology, and it's probably how consumerism is really driven. Some company makes a product and they give it, or a technology, they give it to a number of different companies that capitalize on it, but they don't have access to the same root technology. They develop their own products, and then we have access to those. But looking at the developing countries, a lot of technology transfer, and when it comes to even charitable work, which is what the main thesis of this talk is going to be on, has been, in my opinion, vertical. That we come up with an idea here that we go and think we can apply to Africa, to Southeast Asia, to Latin America, and that it's going to improve their lives dramatically. That it is the bed net, that if we develop here, or Procter & Gamble can develop a new technology, that we can go and give it to individuals in sub-Saharan Africa, and that will drastically improve their lives. I think, though, that's potentially maybe naive, but also a limited way of just given but not empowering. And I'm advocating for a horizontal transfer of technology where the very roots of the academia, or the very roots of the thought process and the genesis of those ideas are shared with post-secondary institutions, such as this course could integrate with other universities globally and create platforms for thought exchange and knowledge transfer. Technology can definitely be a catalyst for change, and that we can talk about cell phones and see how that has changed most of sub-Saharan Africa with the access that has come from there. I'll talk a little bit later on about a system called M-Pesa, which is a way of doing online or mobile banking in East Africa, where people with their cell phones can pay their bills, can transfer money. And so if my mother lives in a very rural part of Kenya or of Tanzania, I can send her money just via a couple of clicks of my mobile and transfer money from my account to a kiosk where she can go and pick up the money, and she gets a notification on her cell phone. There's no fancy app. She just gets a text message which tells her her son has sent her X amount of money. She has a PIN. She can go and collect it. And there is a small fee for that kind of transaction. That technology has revolutionized the way banking is done in Africa, particularly where The infrastructure is not fully available yet, but this new way of transferring this technology has managed to empower countless people's lives and change them, but give them opportunities and access. So I'm not going to give a timeline for how these things happen, because I think that takes a lot of time to go into, but I'll talk about IC Change, or Innovative Canadians for Change, which is the not-for-profit organization that myself and a number of individuals set up after we had been working in a number of different places around the world, particularly in technology transfer, both the development and the introduction of technologies. So what our idea was that instead of being a charity where we collect funds and we send it to different countries to empower them, or that we would just go in and give them bed nets, that we would find a need, or somebody would approach us with an identified need, that we would have an approach to coming up with a solution, and that relies heavily on post-secondary institutions like universities, on industry, on a lot of new groundbreaking research and development theories, that we come up with a potential model for addressing this particular problem. So let's say the problem is lack of clean water in a particular country, that we think and review all the available technologies, design a new one or a hybrid technology, or reverse engineer something to make it economical, and then we create a model to deliver that in a horizontal transfer, that we find a way of transferring that knowledge, particularly in engaging universities on the ground in those countries, as well as local partners and industries. And then we begin what we call the hypothesis testing, that our model really is a hypothesis, that could we potentially introduce this technology in this setting and begin to implement. And our implementation is our testing, that only through going on the ground and with the proper do no harm philosophy that we're trying to uphold at all levels of our organization, can we start to authenticate whether the hypothesis is true or whether we're wrong in our basic premise and we're potentially doing harm or we're not doing them any good. We do a monitoring and evaluation, and we open our archives to external monitoring and evaluation, and people on the ground give us feedback, and we change our model accordingly through a series of back and forth. Once we come up with the proper implementation, once it gets carried through to sustainability, we publish our mistakes and we publish our best practices of what we learn, and then we share our models in an open source format for other people to improve on, to adapt, to replicate, or to scale. So our first project that really came out from a research project that I had when I was in my undergrad was to address this particular problem, or this mental image, that whenever you talk about water access in Africa, this picture comes to the minds of many people. And this is a well that's built in a village near pretty much everywhere where I work. There is a water well like that. This water well was funded by a charity group that came in from the West. They built this well. They helped a lot of individuals with it. And from this kind of picture, you have whole industries that pop up around these wells, because with water comes a lot of different outcomes. So this well in particular was in a couple of villages next to us, and we had mud brick makers that popped up around the well because there was water for them to make bricks, and there was a whole economic advantage to them making bricks. They were doing very well because women didn't need to walk to the stream anymore. They had more time. They could go to school. They could do more things with their time. And then the well broke. And there wasn't a way of repairing the well in this particular village. Or at least there wasn't the awareness or the the organization to be able to collect the necessary funds, which was about $100 to fix this particular well, that collectively the organization of the village couldn't come up with the funds because people didn't trust that whoever they were going to give the money to was going to actually go through and fix the well. So the well dried up, the mud brick makers lost their little market jobs, the women had to walk to the stream, and they couldn't maintain their way of life, so they stopped going to school, and everything went back to the way it was before the well was actually built. So in my opinion, this is the epitome of a vertical technology transfer. So somebody came up with the model for how to do a well. They went to sub-Saharan Africa, they drilled a whole bunch of wells, and then they were like, that's great. It bought everybody 5 to 10 years. People became reliant on them, and then when they break, there wasn't the necessary infrastructure because the right methods for transferring that technology were an undertaking. So we decided from those lessons that we would try to do something a little bit maybe more along the lines of do no harm, that we were going to attempt our best to come up with a product that could be manufactured locally. So we researched a lot of different technologies, and we thought that if we could reverse engineer a ceramic water filter, that if we took just like those pump filters that you can see at Mountain Equipment Co-op, those that you can take on camping trips, they have ceramic elements in them. What if we could make a very cheap but effective ceramic element like that? We recruited a potter and a microbiologist, and that's our potter up there, the gentleman with the beard, and our microbiologist is sitting at the microscope, and we developed prototypes here at the U of A. So the first prototype, you can see there, those three sitting there, was made from one batch of clay mixed with an organic material and fired at hot temperatures, and we got a ceramic porous medium. We poured water through, and lo and behold, when we tested it, it removed a significant proportion of bacteria and parasite eggs, which we were testing. So to us, that was a pretty big breakthrough from a technology point of view, but could that actually mean anything on the ground? Could we build an industry to deliver this kind of product on the ground, to make it affordable for individuals, and to improve it that it actually was not just a charity model, but that it was a business and an industry locally supported and locally run? In the bottom right corner, you can see this series of cathodes and an alternator, and we from some research and some papers that were going around, found out that adding a silver coating to these ceramic elements improved their efficacy significantly, and that our water filters were able to get rid of close to 100% of E. coli and fecal bacteria. So we thought, what better way of delivering this technology than to create a point-of-use household water system, that the ceramic pot would sit inside a receptacle with a lid and a spigot or a tap at the bottom, that individuals who are collecting water would pour the water at their home in the ceramic pot. It would filter the water, and they would have a safe storage with the bucket or the receptacle, and drink the water, clean water and safe water at the household. That they didn't need to come up with whole big industries that they would purify the water and tap it to their house, because that was going to be a few years. And looking at where we decided to implement, 50% of the people in Kenya don't have access to tap water or to protected water. In order to make sure that our filters, when we're going to go on the ground, were tested and actually passing microbiological efficacy, one of the other lecturers in this course, Dr. Robert Rennie, was kind enough to help us purchase a portable microbiome kit, and we set up our little workshop in the western part of Kenya, in a place you can see here, Kitale. There's a little place right close to it that was called Bungoma, where we set up our initial workshop. Over the next couple of years, we moved to a bigger establishment, and we moved actually to Kitale, and that's where now we have our operations. And I'll show you some pictures of what we do. Now, the reason why we picked that area is because of this map. This is a drought map of Kenya from the early 2000s. So you can see that the areas that are orange are in a state of emergency. These people don't have, they're in arid areas, and the drought has hit them so severely that they don't have access to clean water. The green areas are areas that are will require emergency operations, and to be honest, this was an old map. Now a lot of these green areas have become orange areas, and some of the yellow areas have become green because the drought is progressing. We decided to set up in the yellow area where we would have, it wouldn't be an emergency zone, but it would be close enough to the emergency areas that we can supply them with water filters. The reason for that was as water access decreases, people go to worse and worse quality of water, and so they will drink more dangerous water that was before deemed unacceptable, but because of lack of access, they have to drink it. So we set up our operations in a place called Common Ground for Africa, and you can see our little sign, the Kenya Ceramic Project there. And a few years ago, we started building a factory, and over a few months, we managed to build an entire factory that manufactures about 600 to 1,000 filters a month that each of these filters supplies a family of 5 with clean water access for 2 to 3 years. Now, costing of these filters is always the issue. So how much do you think a filter like that should cost? Less than $30? Okay, how about you? $5? Okay, so an optimist in the crowd. Okay, so we looked at what the business plan looked like, the raw materials, and we managed to be able to produce these filters at about $7 to $8 and are selling them for about $10. The price fluctuates depending on availability of resources, but as we're scaling up, our business model should bring the price down, hopefully close to a number like you said. But even with a price of about $10 or $12 per filter, depending on how you're selling it, getting people to buy these water filters is very difficult because people are still living on a very subsistence-based income, very low income, and about 85% of that income is going to the bare necessities that they cannot, even when school fees come around, they cannot afford those fees and they need to borrow money to pay for them. So how were we going to convince an individual that makes probably about $2 a day that they're going to need to pay $10 for a water filter? It doesn't sound like much, to us, but to them, it was the equivalent of us purchasing a fridge, that kind of investment. For us, it's taken that, you need a fridge, you're going to buy a fridge, and you save for it because you have the appropriate loan and credit card structures that can help you get the money and pay it back. But in those areas, and we're not a financing institute, that they'd have to buy these filters. So creating the incentives for people to actually want to buy these filters is our challenge. That now we went from a technology, we developed a technology, we built an industry to build and make these water filters affordably on the ground. We transferred the whole process into local Kenyan hands, and now it's operated with a Kenyan CEO, with Kenyan staff, with Kenyan bank accounts and accountants. But now we were going to need to think about how do we get people to want to buy these filters, to move the filters from our factory and our shop to people's homes. Now, we're running a not-for-profit operation. Any revenue that comes in goes to paying our staff, but it also goes back into our factory. So in fact, we're a social enterprise. That's the model that we have set up IC Change to be, and any project that we undertake has the social entrepreneurship kind of ideas where it's not that it doesn't make any money, but that any money that it generates has to go towards the mandate of the project that we're undertaking. So initially, when we were developing the technologies, we thought that we were very clever and that we were coming up with a breakthrough idea, pardon me, but we found out that other groups around the world had made similar water filters and that they had been in operation for 15, 20 years. But we'd really not heard about these projects before. And it came down to why were these projects not successful or not scalable at reaching people. And my opinion is that the different projects that were ran in different countries, particularly in South America, with this technology, were focused on an industry or corporation model, that it would help the potter and the people who own the factory generate revenue, and a byproduct of that would be helping improve the quality of life and the quality of the water of the individuals who are drinking it. We thought we should turn that upside down and think of a different way of engaging people, and that we would create a product that was more affordable, that it was a not-for-profit, and that all of our materials would be sourced locally. But the biggest challenge was that we saw, where do they sell their water filters? And most of the people in those organizations sell their water filters to not-for-profit organizations, which have the capital to buy these filters and then distribute them to the communities. Now, do you guys think that's a good model? Does it have any harms, or is that a sustainable solution? Why do you think it's not sustainable? Yeah, exactly. There's no cycling, but it's also these not-for-profits that are buying them are still getting their funds from the West. They're getting their donations through a lot of campaigns that utilize this idea that Africa or Latin America are these, destitute people that need our financial help. And we thought, well, that's not fair. Maybe that if we could just engage the people ourselves, that we could create the impetus for them to see the value in this product, and they would invest, just as we do in buying fridges and buying stoves and buying all these other things, that they would see this as a value added to their life. The way we found that was by going to the supermarkets. Maybe I'll just jump ahead. We can come back to those pictures in a little bit. But we decided that we would go to the supermarkets and engage people pretty much right where they shop. And we talked to them, we did surveys, we talked about price points, and a lot of them just said that it was too expensive, that even at $10, it was not affordable. And we said, well, if we could subsidize the filters, but then we'd be going against our mandate of how we're going to create a sustainable industry. So we looked instead into how much do people pay for the repercussions of not having access to clean water. And those are diarrheal disease, hours lost, people coming out of school, mothers having to take their kids to the doctor. And we found that for an average typhoid, which is a bacteria that causes diarrhea and fever, usually found in the water, it would cost for treatment alone, let alone the opportunity cost, $30 per individual that's sick to get treated from typhoid. And it wasn't until we really contrasted those numbers to the people that we were working to deliver these products to, that they started to see this as value added. And products started to roll off the shelves. And then the word of mouth started to come that, well, how come you don't have your water filter? And where is your Sarah Maggi, or this product that we made? And Sarah Maggi, Sarah is short for ceramic, and Maggi is the Kiswahili word for water. So we thought that now we've gone from these fine gentlemen who make filters here. This is me in the back of a van designing these machines that subsequently made filters, to our full work staff, making filters, stamping them for quality control, testing them, or these guys who are just chilling, and firing the filters in a kiln, testing the filters for flow rates and microbiological assessments, and even getting the buckets locally made with plastic companies in Nairobi itself. So we decided that we would focus and turn ourselves into a full corporation with a marketing strategy, with a marketing director, and that we were going to go all in. That we were not going to abandon this project just with the transfer of the technology, that we were going to transfer the entire business model, that we redefined the business model and started engaging people now. Now, for transparency, we're selling to not-for-profits that deliver water filters to the drought areas up north, and a lot of them give those filters away. I don't think that's a sustainable model, but I also think that as an organization with limited capacity, the people who need these humanitarian assistance also need these water filters. But we're working on trying to phase out our not-for-profit sales and focus on urban and rural sales. And that's what we've been successful at, showing an increasing number of filters are bought by people without needing to convince them. That people come into the supermarkets where our filters are now on shelves, and they go and buy their water filters. And probably the most humbling moments were sitting at a coffee shop somewhere and seeing somebody that you've never met, you've never talked to, a mother walking with her kid, go into a supermarket and come out carrying one of our water filters and just goes home. So engaging the government was also another way we went about the Ministry of Labor and working with the Ministry of Agriculture to introduce these ideas and products, and also using new technologies like geographic information systems to map out, especially in the rural areas that are harder to penetrate, what kind of women groups are working there, how can we target women groups to become our advocates, but also to create business models where they buy filters from us and sell them at a bit of a margin of profit for them to incentivize them. These are other networks that we sell filters to. We ended up meeting the royal couple. The government of Alberta gave us an invitation to come and present this idea to the royal couple. They also have a pretty big vested interest in Kenya, both with Prince William doing a lot of humanitarian work in Kenya, and also their engagement was there. So we managed to bond and hit it off a little bit when they came here in Alberta in July of last year. So we've made a technology, we've transferred it horizontally to individuals, and we could call it a day and just kind of rest, but unfortunately no such luck. We decided that we would take it to the next level, that our filters get rid of bacteria, but there's a whole bunch of other toxins and chemicals that also could benefit from our business model and our platform that we've made. So we decided to focus on ways to develop and expand the current ceramic water filter initiative to improve just the potable water. So looking at new ways of designing filters, new shapes, new models, new buckets, but also how can we get rid of things like arsenic? How can we get rid of organophosphates and fluoride in the water? So we've come up with a few different models. This is one of them, where you can see the ceramic element is this core here sitting in a 2-bucket system. But you can see in the middle here, there is a second cylinder that's empty that we envision being able to add modular interventions so that the dirty water will be outside. It gets filtered via the ceramic matrix to get rid of bacteria. It encounters a second intervention like arsenic remover, and the water drips clean out here, and this little hole here you can put a spigot and you have clean water. With that modular intervention, of course it would add expenses, but individual or communities that don't have Arsenic problems don't need arsenic filters, but communities that do have an arsenic problem usually also have bacterial problem in the water. The bacteria is the common element, so we figured we'll create a basic platform like an iPad or a new tablet of some kind, and these modular interventions are the apps that you can introduce. And of course, it helps foster new industries and new technologies. So we're looking to develop more tailored solutions and, of course, to further the science by engaging various academic institutions.